Hello, my name's Alvin. If we haven't met before, I'm an architecture graduate, got my bachelor's and my master's, had some of the best experiences of my life during the degree. I won some pretty cool awards along the way, somehow made it onto a 30 under 30 shortlist, and most importantly, managed to find my absolute dream job by the time I had graduated. And now that I'm here, I really want to just make this video to help anyone out there that is struggling with architecture school. I want to help save you those 3 to 4 years it took me to realize that, and actually just get that from the get-go, or from whatever point you're at right now. And I want to preface this by saying these are not the answers. These are just the things that I took from not only my own journey, but I did a whole thesis on architecture schools. And so this video is a full breakdown of all of that. Everything that I learned in order to get the most out of my time at uni. I'll show you exactly how I approach things from studios to crits to industry networking, and offer some frameworks that you might be able to apply to your life if you feel like you're struggling with those things at the moment and haven't found the right solutions. And don't worry, I know this is a really long video. It's not something I typically do, but I have timestamped everything for your benefit if you just want to skip to a certain part and you're struggling with something specifically, so feel free to skip around. But I do encourage anyone who is just struggling in general to watch through the whole video, because I do think that by the end you'll see how everything does come together. And yeah, I'd go as far as to say that for some of you, this is the most important lecture that your university will never give you. So let's get into it. Probably the biggest issue I found in architecture school is priority setting. This comes from speaking to hundreds and hundreds of students during my time, and it's probably the first thing that I'd say people need to get their head around. This is something that applies to not just first years, but everyone, because priorities change over time. And I think that's one of the most important things to realize as early on as possible. When you first come into uni, you're probably still in the same mindset as you were in school. At uni, I think it's more about what aspects of your own life do you prioritize more. And that's a very important distinction, I think, that needs to be made, especially for someone who's a young adult, who's, figuring out who they are. And I'd even go as far as saying that aiming to just pass, to just get that degree, for me, worked so much better because it gave me time to prioritize other parts of my life, like meeting people, networking, and actually figuring out who I was, who I am, what I wanted in life, in order to actually put the energy into those things. If you really think about it, everyone in uni is competing to get the best grades, but really you're not there to compete, you're there to learn. When you start to think everything is important, that's when you get stressed, because you want to tackle everything all at once and you don't know which things to prioritize. And having spoken to so many people in the industry as well, they will tell you that they barely look at your grades. So if you're on board with this idea of setting priorities, I think the next step is figuring out how to do that. And it's easy for me to say, I can disregard grades, I can focus on this and that, but how do you actually get yourself to believe that? If you're in your first year, what matters? Try and forget grades for 1 second and think about what's important to get out of your first year. It's probably just to build those foundations and hopefully build up those good habits that you can take into the next 5 years of your education and way beyond that. So maybe think about it in that way rather than thinking about all these different things that you need to achieve at once. What are the core things that matter the most, and how can you achieve that? Different seasons require different focuses, and you should really think about that every year rather than having a very closed and narrow mind about only achieving one thing every year, which is getting good grades. Really understand that these things change because they are supposed to change over time. The second step is probably to try and figure out how to achieve those things that you've set as your priorities, and also think about what to let go this time. I think it's easy to focus only on goals, but then when you also write down things that aren't a priority, that's when you can remind yourself in those stressful times that, hey, this actually isn't that important to me right now, and as much as I do need to get it done, it's not that important, and I'll do it to my best ability given the circumstances, given that my priorities are elsewhere. This is how much energy and time I can dedicate to this thing, and you just have to accept that. Because when you are scrambling and you're trying to find the time to do all these different things at the same time, you can lose track of where your priorities lie, and that's always going to be overwhelming. Now, all of that was just about setting priorities in your life and general stuff. But you can actually apply this specifically into university as well, because they literally provide you a cheat sheet of everything that you should be prioritizing. And that's a criteria sheet. Now, it's crazy that so many people, myself included, for a very long time, didn't realize this, but all the answers that you are looking for in what you need to learn out of this course, what your assignments are supposed to look like, all of that is in the criteria sheet. And when you can actually look at that and break down like exactly what you need to do for each assignment and whatnot, it actually makes your life much easier. In my final studio, I submitted it 3 days early and I got a very good mark because I had literally sat down, gone through every single mark, made sure I spoke about it during my presentation to be able to prove that you have met everything that you have been asked of. And if anything, that's the biggest mistake students make, is they just waste time on things and then they complain about time management. It's not about the courses being too much and asking too much of you. It's you doing more than you actually need to. That's a big problem that I've seen for so many years, and I really want people to understand you don't have to. I found that so many students at some point, especially for studio, tried to achieve everything. And that's when it became stressful. That's when it became really time consuming. To make things even easier, if you're like me and you didn't even care about grades, if you could meet those criteria to the minimum, then you would have so much more time to apply your energy to different things. For example, you could do this step by step with your criteria sheet from week 1 all the way to the end of the term. As soon as you get it, start highlighting the key information. Figure out what the learning outcomes of this course are, figure out what your assessments are supposed to look like, because usually, as far as I know, they are given to you very early on, before you even start the course sometimes. So make sure you take that time to actually prepare. When people ask, do you have any questions at the start of the first lecture, maybe if you are prepared, you can literally take those questions to the tutors straight away and ask, hey, I'm not really too sure what this means. Could you help me figure this out, or break it down for me, or explain it to me a bit differently? There are a lot of ways to be able to understand these criteria when they aren't worded very well, which happens. Once you break it down into this checklist, you can literally see where you should be putting your time, because it's a breakdown of everything that you need to do. So you obviously wouldn't spend 80% of your time rendering something when it's not even really on the criteria sheet. And you can see that there are these major things that you're supposed to check off before. If you have extra time later on, sure, like spend a bit of extra time working on your own skills, rendering and stuff like that. That's totally fine. But towards the end of the course, when you're getting to that point where you feel like you've done a lot of the work, stop and review your work based on the criteria sheet. You know, literally write down in every little box how you've approached everything, how you've achieved everything. And that way you might be able to identify the things that you might have let slip, or the things that you think might need to be a bit stronger in order to achieve that criteria. Now, touching on burnout, touching on overworking, there's this stupid thing in architectural culture where not sleeping is a badge of honor. This culture just never ends in architecture, you know, because people accept that that's just how it is. It's a good thing to overwork. It's funny. This is just part of the job. It's not. It shouldn't be. And when young people keep taking these practices and then get exploited by the industry, by the people who also went through that process, who think it's fine, it's just part of it, the cycle never ends. And I think we need to somehow end the cycle, or the changes that need to happen in the industry never will. So in some way, it is your responsibility to set those boundaries, to say no, to prioritize yourself over your work now rather than later, because you don't want that to become a habit. You don't want that to become normal in your life. It really, really won't benefit anyone. It's a lose, 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 lose. If you want to work hard at uni, you want to pull all-nighters, even though they're not always very productive, that's on you, that's fine. But then don't let that happen again once you get into the professional world, because then you are not only harming yourself, you're harming the industry. And eventually you will probably think that it's so normal that when you are in a position to hire, you expect that from other people because you went through it. And that's where it's just not okay. Now, hopefully if you're in second year, you're working on setting your priorities and everything that was talked about in the last section. But it is a slightly different time to first year, I guess, where yes, you're still obviously building those foundations, but you can kind of get comfortable with what architecture school is all about. You know what is expected for the most part in terms of what a studio is, what a crit is. Second year for me was really interesting because I think that's the year I figured out a lot about myself as a person. It's kind of crazy that we're expected as young people to pick our careers for the rest of our lives at the age of like 16, 17 before we start university. So let's start with getting out of your comfort zone and figuring out who you are. I think this is a big topic. Some people spend their whole lives not figuring that out, or at least half their lives, and then go through a midlife crisis and, you know, that whole thing. I do think at some point everyone should take that time to figure out what they like. And the only way to do that is through exploration. And exploration means doing things that are uncomfortable, which unfortunately, or fortunately, I actually really enjoy it, means getting out of your comfort zone. For me, the most pivotal moment in my early 20s was going on exchange. That was the most uncomfortable, it was the most scary thing I've done in a long time, or ever in my life at that point, because as a very, very shy kid, I had to go overseas to a country where I couldn't even speak the language, I couldn't communicate with people, couldn't even do my own groceries, and I had to try and get by. I had to make friends, I had to go to uni, I had to basically live my life in a completely different setting. And as someone who had never done anything like that before and who was always pretty safe just being in my shell, I couldn't get away with that. And that was really uncomfortable for me. It was really hard, but it was the best thing I ever did because it forced me to do things that I normally wouldn't. And that's all getting out of your comfort zone really is. It's kind of just getting reps in for things that you haven't done before and eventually just getting better at it. And through doing that, you're not always going to find things you enjoy. You know, I found plenty of things that I didn't enjoy and I kind of didn't do them again, but I also found things that I really did enjoy that I had never had the opportunity to do before or try because I was too scared. This change in mindset for me was the start of something very new. I started to break the rules. I started to do things and take risks that I otherwise wouldn't have. And taking risks at university is the best thing you'll ever do because you're in the safest environment in the world to take risks. Obviously, I'm not trying to encourage you to go out there and fail everything, but I think it's really easy to understand why product can be seen as more important. It determines your grade, it's what goes in your portfolio, and it might eventually lead into a job. But if you don't focus on the process, that's where you're actually missing out on a lot during uni, because you can do the same thing the same way every time and you can get good results, but you're not really learning much if you do things that way. Everything is a process, and you can even learn about different soft skills like how to manage my time better. All of that is part of the process. And I guess the final product can be a representation of that. Now, if you, for example, aren't very good at time management, your final product might be a result of that. And that will encapsulate what your process is like. But if you're able to reflect on your process after every project and then refine that the next time around and improve that, or start implementing things that you might not be very good at or you want to get better at into that process, despite how it might impact the final result, I think you'll be learning a lot more at university that way. Keeping a visual timeline in the form of a sketchbook or whatever can be really helpful for you as you progress throughout the semester or even in your years as a designer, because then you can look back on things that you used to do and improve and iterate on that over time. Processes can and probably should be messy along the way, so there's no point in taking time to clean it all up so it looks great. Something that you can always do is set your own deadlines for certain parts of your process that you know are going to happen. Because once you understand how your process works and how you can improve it, you can start allocating times to that in line with the actual deadlines. And then by setting your own deadlines, you can make sure you're always on top of things. So give it a try and integrate that thinking the next time you start a project or wherever you are right now. My only goal is to pass.
Great.
As much as I want the project to be fantastic, I think within the parameters I'm working within, it's probably not possible. I don't really have the time to achieve that. Setting boundaries. This is something that a lot of people don't even know how to do up until their final year and then going into the profession. So learning to say no, even if it's scary, is really important as early on as university, because this should become a habit. Now, I'm not saying you should be this asshole who just says no to everything and rejects any idea and anything because it's hard. Burnout will happen if you decide to say yes to every single thing and you don't set boundaries. Now, this kind of goes back to setting priorities, but it's more so about how do you set boundaries between you and someone else. You don't need to say yes to everything, especially not to your tutors. Just because your tutors ask you to do something doesn't mean you have to do it. This isn't primary school, this is university, where you're an adult or a young adult who is able to set boundaries on certain things. And you have to be ready to be able to stand up for yourself and say, hey, I understand why, blah, 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 but this is why I'm not doing it. And realistically, you should be able to justify why you're setting these boundaries in the first place, because communicating that to them will help them understand. At least you can at least try to help them understand why you're making that decision. Here are a list of things that I probably use a bit too often, but I think have been, for me, the right balance between being polite but also firm. If you've been enjoying this video or you've been getting something out of it, please do consider subscribing. I am trying to build up this YouTube channel again. I'll talk more about it at the end, what the direction of the channel is going to be, because it's going to be a bit different, but yeah. So, third year. You're basically at the end of your first stint at university. And for me, third year I think is more about two things predominantly. One being the soft skills that you should be starting to learn and think about during university. And secondly, what's next, how you're going to take those first steps into this industry or maybe decide to leave. This is a big one. In my third year, that's when I came back from exchange. I felt like I was this new person who had just come back from Italy for 6 months. But then I started to realize that as the semester went on, it was the same old as before. Nothing had really changed. And it was kind of up to me to make that change, because by the end of that year, I was gonna be looking for jobs in architecture. To touch on the soft skills first, I think that's probably a good time for you, and would have been for me, to start developing those soft skills in third year, because at that point you definitely do build your confidence over the first 2 years, and it is probably the right time to start thinking about things outside of coursework and university. It's not very often that people are put in an environment where they have to do public speaking very, very consistently, the same way architecture school forces you to. And a lot of people see that as negative. I definitely did not enjoy it as a shy person. But by the end of it, I was kind of really into the public speaking part of it, or at least trying to improve in that. Because, naturally as a shy person, I thought people that were good at public speaking were just born with that skill. And you're either born with it or you're not. But over time, I started to learn that that's a skill. And that's one of the many soft skills that you can learn as a university student, where you're in this environment that allows you to fail over and over and over again, and there are no risks involved. Now, some practical tips on how you can improve public speaking are: one, recording yourself, just like this. I have improved so much as a speaker through recording myself and then watching it back. There are some really great YouTube videos about this, and I'm no expert in this, so maybe if you are interested, please watch this YouTube video where there's a breakdown of how you can watch yourself back, and based on these 3 different elements of public speaking, learn how to improve. And it's not something you're ever really taught, especially not in architecture school, where you're expected to just present and present and present. So aside from the skill of public speaking itself, there is this really important element of storytelling that I think is really crucial into making a presentation engaging. We all have sat through those presentations where you just want to go home and you're just tired of hearing the same keywords over and over again. The beautiful thing about your presentation is that you can use AI. If you do really want to write a script or a structure or whatever and use the help of AI, there's no way to really know that, because it's a verbal presentation. Right now, there are so many more tools to help you improve than I had access to back in 2 years ago, which is ridiculous. And if you're not using it to improve, then that's kind of a wasted opportunity for you to get better at a really important life skill. So now that we've talked about presenting, it's time to talk a bit about feedback, which again is kind of a soft skill that you should be able to learn during your time in architecture school. Now, before we go on, I understand that there are going to be instances where you get feedback that is not constructive at all. And in those instances where you just have a mean or nasty person giving you feedback, please try to not take that to heart. It's not personal. That person probably experienced that during their education and they're just kind of relaying that forward again. It's about that cycle, that ongoing cycle in architecture school. Realistically, you're a student who's there to learn, to improve, to understand how you can do better, or understand just how someone else is thinking about the same thing that you're thinking about. Now, feedback is one of those things where you can either take it or leave it. Here are some tips that I've kind of picked up over the years on how to handle crits and also critics. The first thing is to just listen. It doesn't matter what they're saying, just when you get to a certain point, just listen first. Listen to everything they say, no matter how mean, how nasty or useless their input is. Just take a moment to listen. If you have to, take notes as well. That's always really helpful to have that written down so you don't forget something later on. And I'm not just suggesting that you hear what they say. I actually mean listen and understand. And that means that if you don't really understand what they're trying to say, ask them to explain why. Now, this is one of the most important things you'll be able to do in that moment, especially if you're unsure what they're saying, or if you feel like what they're saying is mean, or if it comes down to them being completely nasty and not constructive at all and not even offering any feedback. You can ask directly, or you can call them out on it and say, hey, this isn't very constructive. I don't know what to do with your feedback. Can you actually offer me some constructive feedback so that I can take this and apply it to my project and my work? I really appreciate it. And smile at them and then move on, because if they're not there to help you, then you shouldn't even bother listening to what they're saying anymore, and maybe give that time to another critic who is actually there to try and help you. There are ways to handle that type of criticism, and I think more and more now it's acceptable to do that. So don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. So at the end of the crit, once you have these notes and you have all this feedback written down and you understand what they're trying to say, that's when you can sit down and break down all the feedback and then apply that to your project if you think it improves it. Or you can talk through it with your tutor. You say, hey, I took all these notes from the presentation. This is what the crit suggested. This is how I think it might work with my project. This is how I don't think it might work with my project. How can you help me here? It really is then again about communicating back to your tutor to understand their perspective on what was said, because maybe they will disagree. You never know. So communication in terms of feedback in all aspects is very important. And make sure that even if you think you sound silly or stupid for asking why, you're not. You're there to learn, you're there to understand. So don't be afraid to make clarifications and to ask why. It's super important.
Well, I am not really presenting today, so I'm kind of just going to go over what I've done since last week, and then I'd love for everyone to come up here and draw all over my paper.
Towards the end of my degree, those interim reviews, is that the correct word? The ones in between your final presentation, to me, those became extra feedback sessions for external crits or external people that I would just want to ask questions about my project, because that's what they were for. They're really there for you to develop your project and concept further. It was as simple as that. I didn't think too much of that, and it took a lot of pressure off me as well, because in no way was I presenting a final idea that was developed in any way. So I think shifting that mindset in how you see those reviews as well can be really helpful in making them more useful for you in terms of developing that final result. I think that's actually something really key that I took into my final ever studio, where I had developed this script over time and I just kept iterating on the script. And by the end of it, it had done a really good job at meeting all the criteria points and explaining the project in full based on all that iteration over tutorials, over presentations, where people would ask me questions about this part of the project, this part of the project. I made sure that in the script, there was one line or two lines or whatever that addressed each point that was questioned. And then by the end of it, there were no questions. It was just purely a presentation where it wasn't about improving the project or whatever. It was just about giving all the information, telling the story of the project, and then being assessed based on that. Portfolios are much more important than your grades, and so if you think about it this way, you have unlimited time to actually work on your portfolio versus that deadline for university. So I hope that takes a bit of pressure off you, that you can obviously still keep working on those projects once that university subject is done. So keep that in mind, but it's not the end all and be all. It is something that you should have readily available when asked for by someone that you have connected with. But what very little people are talking about nowadays is how social media can be your portfolio. Now, portfolios in this case, I think, are more about personal branding, more about helping people see the person that you are rather than your work, rather than being defined by your GPA and stuff like that. I think this is a way for people to see like who you are, what your interests are, what your personality is like, and what you're able to offer them maybe. Your online portfolio is going to basically be the opposite of your polished final portfolio with only a few projects in it. It's going to be everything. It's going to be about your process, it's going to be about your thinking, it's going to be about who you are. If you are serious about trying to create this online portfolio that is separate from that final PDF that you will produce for job applications, here's how you can go about it. Set up an account, put the profile picture and name, whatever. That isn't really that important. It's more about getting used to the idea of publishing your work, being comfortable doing that, and also publishing your process more so than the final products. Because when you're in architecture school, you are producing a crazy amount of content. Like, you can basically go through the whole entirety of a project from start to finish and how you develop it entirely online. You can go from the early conceptual stages, sketch down those ideas, post them online, explain it in the description. Even if no one's looking at it, you'll basically be keeping that visual diary that we spoke about earlier, but online. And over time, I promise you that people will start seeing that, and because they might be able to resonate with your ideas, or they might like your drawing style or something, you start to be able to connect with a community of like-minded people. And that is your first step into networking from as early on as first year. I had firms reach out to me based on my work because I put it out online. It's definitely possible for you to get interest from the profession through just doing this, because not that many people are doing it. And if you want to stand out, this is one way to do it. By this time, I hope people are thinking about this. Now, I don't think that finding first job and blah, 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 it should be the ultimate goal. I do think it is all about learning. It's all about getting those skills and understanding who you are. That's what I think university is about, but getting a job is important. The reality is that for the most part, it is about who you know, not what you know. And this goes back again to priorities and, understanding that grades don't really matter, because who you know in the industry will basically dictate how you might find your first job, unless you're in that top 5% of students who just ace everything. But if you're not, which I definitely wasn't, the best approach you can take to getting your first steps in the industry are through industry connections, and the only way to do that is by networking. That being said though, I think it is more important to understand yourself first before you start to embark on this whole networking journey. Otherwise, those relationships that you're supposed to be building in your professional life don't actually end up being relationships. They're just one-offs where you might meet someone and get their LinkedIn or something like that. I personally see professional relationships as connections you have with people where you have something in common. And that's probably the most important thing and most overlooked part of professional connections. Is there's no point in knowing every single person in the industry. There's just no point. Now, one of the biggest questions I always get asked at these, because I have ended up going to probably more events than lectures in the last 6 years, I have had a lot of students come up to me and ask, hey, this is my first time at a networking event. It's kind of intimidating, it's kind of scary. What do I do? How do I approach professionals? I'm just a student. Now, when you get to an event, the chances are you will see people that don't know anyone either, and they will be standing alone. Usually, those are the people that I would recommend people speak to first, because you never know who they are. They are probably expecting to meet people. You're not going to shock them if you walk up to them and introduce yourself. It's just very unlikely, because they are in that environment. They know what to expect. I hope. Another thing I tell people who go to these events and ask for advice is that you shouldn't be there to kind of try and get as many LinkedIn connections as possible. You should really try and get maybe one, if you're lucky, two genuine connections from that night, and that's about it, because that's hard. But once you understand who you are, what you're interested in, and you can actually talk about that stuff, when you find those people who are interested in those same like really niche parts of architecture or whatever, that's when you'll find that connection, and that's when you'll be able to talk to them more and more. That's when they'll click with you and understand like, hey, I met this person that one time at an event, and that's how you stand out. I would definitely say that in third year, prioritizing these types of events can be really beneficial. So if you're tossing up between an event or working on an assignment, I would more likely lean towards going to the event than doing the assignment, because you could potentially get so much more out of it. One professional connection is worth so much more than your whole GPA. I'd go as far as saying that. All it takes sometimes is to just meet the right person once and you're set. So don't miss out on those opportunities to do so. I've heard so many stories of professionals getting really sick and tired of having students come up to them and then just ask, how do I get a job? There's nothing wrong with showing curiosity about what they do. As a student, you can always ask. You know, if you have questions about the industry, I think that's perfectly fine to ask, because they probably understand how hard it is to get the first step in the door and would hopefully be willing to help you in that case and to be able to talk you through any questions. You can also ask them for their contact details and say, hey, thanks for your time tonight. If I have any questions in the future, would it be okay if I send you an email or something like that? But just respect their time, respect that for the most part, they probably aren't there to help you find a job. So don't expect that from anyone. By the time you finish your third year, I think university is really what you made of it. And there are definitely ways to make the most out of it until there's real change in the system. You know, I was trying to fight it for a long time through the documentary that I made, which is still on the YouTube channel if you want to watch it. But I think that the conclusion of that documentary was that we can't really do much to the system as students, and the best we can do is understand what's wrong with it, but also work around it and focus on doing what we're supposed to do at uni in the first place. I'd still go through that education system again, despite its flaws, because I think for me as a person, for what I needed in my life at that time, it was very important for me. And I hope that everyone does get that at the end of the day through university in one way or another, depending on what you need. I thought about maybe doing this as fourth year and fifth year, but instead I kind of want to talk about the masters as a whole and what I think the purpose of it is, because some people see it as unnecessary, and I totally get that. If I had approached my first 3 years differently and applied everything that I've spoken about now, I might not have bothered with my masters. I think the best thing I got from my masters overall was getting to move to a different city, which is completely unrelated to the degree itself, but also meeting the right people. The people I met along the way, that's what really helps me. So do I think a master's is worth it for everyone? Absolutely not. For the most part, people who are pursuing architecture will need a master's, but people who aren't, it's really hard for me to justify. I'd say even if you're not 100% sure, I'd say maybe work a little bit first before even applying for a master's or starting one, because otherwise you're dedicating an extra 2 years to what could be the same as your bachelor's. I do think the thesis is a really important part of your overall education, not because of the grade or because of the final result, but because it gives you that opportunity to explore something that you're deeply passionate about. And if you're able to apply those same things that we've already discussed in your masters, I think that's when things can be taken to another level. I think that's when things get really exciting. My thesis project, it was something I was so passionate about, it was something I was so driven to do. This goes back to that whole idea about finding out what you're interested in. I think your thesis is the opportunity to do that, to understand that you have this chance to find this specialization, this niche, whatever you want to call it, this thing that you're really passionate about and you can see yourself working on for an extended amount of time. For me, That was architecture education. I think for years and years before that, before my thesis even started, I was already investigating it, researching it, and I was so interested in how to make a positive change in that world. I can safely say it helped set the tone of my career now. To give you some context, I co-designed an architecture school with an online community of architecture students, graduates, professionals, all of that. And it was such a fascinating project because what started as a little project on Instagram became something that reached nearly 1 million people, and that was crazy. So your thesis could potentially play a really big role in where it takes you, as long as you kind of make sure that you stay true to what you're actually interested in. You don't do something for the sake of it or because it's easy. You do something that you care about, and you never know where it can take you. Before we end this video, I would like to talk quickly about taking different paths within architecture or outside of architecture, because that's something really important to me, and I know it's really important to a lot of people out there too, because it's a big question on a lot of people's minds. So once you've graduated architecture school, I think there's this expectation that you just go become an architect, you take the next steps into getting a license. It was a long and kind of scary journey for me to get out of architecture. It just wasn't the right fit for me, and that's okay if it's the case for you too. I think it's a hard decision to make after dedicating time and money to it, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much, as long as you have taken something away from it. I don't think it's a scam if you have come out of this degree learning public speaking skills, communication skills, problem solving, critical thinking, how to work in a team. There's so many things that you can be learning through university that people, especially universities, don't advertise, and it's a bit of a shame, because to me as a young adult, those are the most valuable things I learned along the way. And I've been talking for a very long time in this video. I've been recording for like 3 or 4 hours now, and this is my 3rd attempt at this, so it's been hard. But I just needed to make this final video about how important it is to change your thinking about architecture school and even your life as a young person, because these mindsets that are put on us from a very young age, I don't think they're necessarily right. All these systems, they're not built to set us up to succeed necessarily, and acknowledging that is really important, and seeing that is really important, and navigating those is also very important. Yes, I put myself in a lot of debt for it. Yes, there were many times where I questioned all my decisions. It was hard, and maybe I let my parents down a little bit by not continuing down this secure traditional path. But where I am now is pretty good. I'm very happy with where I am career-wise. I think I'm working towards where I want to be in the long term, and I'm excited for the next steps. No matter what part of your architectural education or life you're in right now, I do hope that some things in this video were somewhat useful and helpful. There's only so much I can say. It really is now up to you to implement things that I talked about, or disregard it all, because maybe it just doesn't apply to what you need right now. Where you take your life is ultimately up to you, and if you're gonna take anything away from this video, take that. I kind of want to just end the video here, because that's where I'm at right now. I've focused so much of my 20s, pretty much all of my 20s, on architectural education, architecture school, and now that I'm done with it, I do think it's time to move on. That's part of the reason why, again, I wanted to make this video. I wanted to put it all out there before I move on and start exploring different things as a young adult who, as much as I can talk about all these things, I haven't figured my whole life out. I still have so much to learn. I still have a long, long way to go in so many aspects of my life. But I want to keep documenting it on this YouTube channel now. I might stop talking about architecture, but I do want to keep connecting with people that get what I'm thinking and can teach me things, and we can just build this cool community of people. So if that resonates with you, I really do hope that you come along for that journey.